Welcome back to Death Toll Racing. We got yet another flux core welder to try out, this one being the cheapest one yet at $130. Let's get this thing unboxed and we'll see what it comes with. This welder is also a stick welder, so it'll do flux core welding and stick welding. So that's something the other welders won't do. So you'll see it has an additional stick welder lead, and it has a removable ground lead, which I end up really liking. Here's something else I really like is that latched and handled top. So you don't have to use the strap, although it does come with one. It does have cold feed, just like the Titanium. However, the Flux Core or the FC90 does not have it. It has a very, very similar and recognizable drive wheel system. It's pretty much identical to the other two welders. Now, the roll holder is very similar to the Titanium. And I do have personal preference for the FC90. Now, the wire that comes with it is an E71 TGS wire, which is more of a field repair wire. I prefer an E71 T11, but this is an 040 wire, which is the oddball wire. It's a 1mm wire. It's something where you're going to have to probably buy online. It's nothing you're going to be able to buy locally, most likely, but it's one of those things that does also run 030 and 035. It has drive wheels for both, so it's not a worry there. But we're going to try it out with that 040 wire and see how it runs, since I've never actually ran that before. All right, we got it all set up, and now you put the ground lead in. You're going to put the ground lead in on the positive side, so your work surface is actually positive when you're running flux core, and this is the only one you can actually change it on. The reason for that is because it's stick welder also, which means you'll have to switch that to the other side. It has a chart very similar to the other ones. You'll be using that center column that I'm pointing out there. That's the column you're going to be using for your flux core welder. So now this is a single knob system, and which means it adjusts the wire speed and the voltage together, which seems a little odd. Like, you'd want to be able to adjust it, and you actually can. You just press the center in there, and now you'll adjust your variance in. So what you're adjusting there is your voltage. You'll either go negative or positive, and that will follow you throughout the range. So once you get it dialed in, it will stay that way. So it's pretty cool. So we'll start off by just throwing some welds on this little junk plate we got sitting here. So forgive my welding camera, it's not very good. I actually have a camera inside of a welding hood, but mostly we're just listening to it. I have this all set up for 1/8 inch. All right, that looked pretty good, but what I want to do, I actually want to stress the welder a little bit, so we're going to turn down the voltage, which is going to essentially increase the amps. It's going to make the welder work a little bit harder. So let's just go full volt. All right, that ran that just fine as well. Actually, I kind of like it a little bit better, running a little bit higher of an amp versus volts, which is what'll happen if you turn the voltage down on that with a variance. And it looks pretty good as well. So I had no problem with doing that. It didn't freak the welder out at all. All right, now we'll just weld this angle iron on the top. I'm going to weld it around the corner here. Okay, so that actually worked pretty good. So one thing with that GS wire, anytime you get into a GS wire versus the 11 wire, so the E71 T11 versus E71 TGS, The GS wire tends to be more spattery, but that's because it's kind of cleaning. But I think the intent of it is to be cleaning, so it's going to be better at going over rust and paint and all that type of stuff, which may be a better wire for field repairs, depending on what you're doing. So now let's weld this 1/4 inch plate. So we're going to crank the welder up all the way and give it a go. Okay, so that ran really nice as well. Flux comes off pretty good. Does leave a lot of spatter, but the weld itself is actually pretty nice. So now we're going to change out. I'm going to put in some 035. This is going to be a Lincoln. This is going to be an E71T11 wire. This is a more structural wire. It is also capable of being multi-pass welded, so you can stack welds with it. So you just saw me change out my drive wheels, and then you'll change out your tip, and that's all there is to changing the wire. And then you'll just push the button on the front to match the wire size that you put in it. In our situation, 035. So you just tell the welder, hey, I'm running 035, and it'll get your wire speed to voltage ratio fairly correct. So I'm pointing out here, you want to always tighten your tip in. Some guys will do it finger tight, and then they'll wonder why the threads get stripped out, and that's because it actually starts arcing in there. And so you're kind of welding your tip to your gun itself. So you want to always make sure you have that snugged up a little bit. So now I got it adjusted to 035, and then we're going to set it again for 1/8 inch, and we'll see how it does.
Vertical up.
All right, so that looks pretty good. My vertical up looks just like my flat, so that's pretty good. So it runs really nicely. Okay, so now a real world use. I'm actually going to use this. I got my really junky rake that I've modified, and I use it on my backhoe, which means it gets bent to crap. And I'm going to add this beam to the backside so that I can grab it without it slipping with my little mini tractor here. So we're going to weld that on there. One leg will be here, one leg will be there. And that'll just give me 2 different positions. I can grab it with the upper teeth of my grapple. And we're going to use our new little welder. So it should work pretty good. But this will definitely put it to the test, because I'm going to have that thing turned up all the way. And I'm probably just going to stitch weld that on there on the top, and I'll do a full weld on the bottom, since it's only going to be welded to that flat bar right there. So, all right, I have it set, maxed out. I have my variance of 0. I'm just going to leave it like that. So I should point out, this is the 035 Lincoln wire is what I'm using on this. I kind of regret that a little bit, just because I think I would have liked to have tried the 040 wire that they gave you. You can see there I got a little bit of pinhole, and that's because some dirt fell down while I was welding off of the grapple. I don't know where it came from, but I just kept going. All right, those look pretty good. There's nothing wrong with those welds. Those welds aren't nearly as critical as the one that's going to be on the bottom. So we're going to be doing that one overhead. So now I'm actually doing I'm going to stack some welds. They're going to act as a gusset. So I'll have 3 areas of quite a bit thicker weld, and that'll hopefully keep it from breaking on us. I think it looks pretty good. So there's nothing wrong with that one at all. And now let's see if we can break it. All right, so since I have it set up in the push position, I'm going to try pushing it. This isn't normally how I would use this because I can't really float the bucket this way, or it pushes too hard on it once you start going forward. Normally I'd have it turn the other way, which I'll turn it around here in just a second. But I just wanted to kind of try it out pushing, and just to see if it was a worthwhile way of doing this. The reason I have this bucket, I wanted to be able to have this on there, is for when I have my mower on the back, so I don't have to take my mower off to put the rake on. That way I can rake up my mowings or whatever, or rake up gravel or whatever. So there I am turning it around. And it's pretty easy to pick it up again. So this is actually working out pretty good. And the curve to it, how I bent the crap out of it, I have a really big backhoe and I would grab it with the backhoe. But you can't feel when you push on it. There goes Aquila in the Space Caddy. You can't really feel when you push on it, so I bend it up. This tractor I don't think would really be bending it very often. But this works pretty good. What I do with my gravel, I push it all in that pile, and then I actually use that as road base since it has rocks and everything else in it. So now let's do some thin sheet metal. We're going to put 030 wire in it and weld this up with the machine turned all the way down. This is, I believe it's 18 or 20 gauge sheet metal, and it works pretty good. So this is with 0 variance. I just blew a hole in it. But this is with 0 variance on it, with the machine turned all the way down and 030 wire. This is also an E71 T11 wire. All right, so now I felt like that was a little hot, so I'm going to turn the variance down a half of a volt. So we're going down -5, so it'll be at 16 volts. And this runs quite a bit better. I like this quite a bit better, running down a little bit less voltage. It makes it a little bit easier not to blow through. And normally you don't string or weld sheet metal this thin, or it will tend to warp. This actually didn't warp up too bad, but it works pretty good, and it runs real smooth for being turned down so low. All right, and here it is. Of course, I wire wheeled it before I'm showing it to you, but here it is, and I think it looks pretty good. So now let's try doing stick just to confirm that it does it. I am not the world's most proficient stick welder, but I can do all right. So stick welding, your max amps is 105. So I'm going to use 332 7018. Crap. All right, so that's about as good as it gets with me and stick welding. I never stick weld. It's just one of those things. It was one of the, I tested on it. I do the testing, and that is about the only time you ever used it. We always did dual shield 16 wire, or 052 wire, or 045 wire, and then I ran up to 332. I ran a ton of 332 wire, but that's all flat. That they don't make an all position 332 wire, so that was just for the big stuff or automated stuff. But anyway, it runs stick, and I'm more than happy with the capability of it. That was 332 rod 7018, and I don't think 1/8 inch rod might be pushing it for 105 amps. You can do it, but it's just going to be running probably a little bit on the cold side for you. So I probably should have had it tacked down to the table when I did it. That's why it kind of had the big pop when I first started it. That's because the part kind of jumped off the table when I started the arc. But it worked good, and yeah, I have no complaints with it. It's nice having the option. Probably something I won't use very often, but it is nice having the option to do that. One thing I want to point out, you do switch your ground clamp to the negative side, and then your electrode whip there will be in the positive side. All right, guys. Well, let's do a summary now. How does this thing stack up to the Titanium Harbor Freight welder, which is $150, or the Century FC90, that the price is kind of all over the place depending on where you buy it. But for around $200, we'll say for that one. So this one coming in at $129 or $130, I think is one hell of a bargain because not only does it do everything the other two do, it has roughly the same amperage rating that the Harbor Freight welder does, but it also stick welds. You can add TIG welding to it if you want. It's just going to be a touch start TIG weld. And it has 4-step, which is where you'll pull the trigger. It'll be welding, pull the trigger and let go again, and it'll stop. That's really cool. If you have to reach in a really awkward scenario, you can do it that way, reaching in on a tractor or a combine or something. Everything breaks in the most awkward spot, so that I think is going to be pretty handy. You can stick weld with this, something you can't do with the other ones. That's pretty cool. And then I have to say that this single knob adjustment actually has grown on me to the point where I actually really like it. And the main reason for that is because the variance that you set in, that follows you. So if you're going thick metal, thin metal, thick metal, thin metal, that variance you set in always is there, no matter where you set it. See, it's always there. So once you get this thing dialed in with the wire that you chose to run in it that you like. So this is the Generation 7 welder. So this is the cheapest of the group, $129. If you jump up to a Generation 9, which there'll be a link in the description below for that, it will have an additional little port here that, well, anyway, that's besides the point. It looks a little different. It's the same size physical welder, but it has a gas valve in it. So it will allow you to do MIG welding versus gasless welding. So it's something where if you really want to do MIG welding, and you want one welder that can do everything, it might be an option for you. In my personal opinion, I think I would get this one. It's going to be the simplest of the welders. And then if you want to jump into MIG welding, get another unit, because once you start plugging in bottles and all that stuff, it's going to take the mobility of this thing down drastically. So I prefer this welder versus the other ones. So going back to the single touch knob, because it has single touch knob, then it also is going to have this where you can go 030, 035, 040 right here on the board. And you have to use that because that's how it varies the wire speed for whatever wire, whether you're going thin wire to a thicker wire or whatever, the wire speed's going to change. And that will automatically do that change for you and get you close to the ballpark, and then you'll dial it in with your knob there. So that's pretty cool. So this does have the capability of running 040 wire, which is 1 millimeter wire. That is not a common wire. It's nothing you're going to be picking up at Home Depot or anywhere local, most likely. But I will put a couple links in the description below. I'll find as many as I can on Amazon that have that. I don't think you're going to be able to get an E71 T11. It's all going to be the E71 TGS wire, which is going to not be quite as nice of a running wire as the T11 wire. In my personal opinion, it tends to be a little spattery and all that stuff, but it is good at doing welds on dirty and materials. So maybe stuff you'd be running out into the field. So, okay, so now for the hugest perk of this machine, and that is the handle. The other welders don't have this. And if you were to add a handle to it, you would also have to add the latches like they have. That is huge because I don't like that strap. The strap has its place. Like if you're carrying a welder, maybe repairing a fence or building a fence or whatever, and you have it slung over your shoulder, it's great. But that's really the only thing that strap is good for. The rest of the time, I don't like it. It's cumbersome. It's in the way when you're trying to change your wire and all that stuff. So this handle to me is pretty much a game changer. It doesn't mean you can't add a handle to the other ones, add latches and a handle. You could absolutely do that. But this one, being the cheapest welder and already having that, that's a huge perk. Another huge perk is obviously the ability to stick weld, and the ground lead comes off. I like that. I like storing these things with as little things hanging off of them as possible, especially if you're throwing it in a van or your work truck or your box truck. Having the least amount of things hanging off of it is a huge plus, and just having that coiled up as a separate unit. Speaking of that, this is an AC port plug, and so this is something that will install flush on it, and then it actually recesses the pins down in there so you won't be bending them and breaking them off in your work truck or whatever. So I think we'll be doing a video, maybe just a short, on adding this to our little welder there. So, because that is probably going to be my go-to field welder because it is so handy to move around. Once I add this, it'll be even better yet. So anyway, this will be coming in a near future episode. So that just about sums that up. So being the cheapest welder of the group, it does the most things and they all weld great. It's mostly just the wire that does it. They all feed great. The wire feed units work great. The arc is consistent, and I mean, all three of them weld great. This being cheaper, being also able to stick weld, having 4-step, that single knob that it has actually grown on me quite a bit, and then the ability to take the ground clamp off, and then we're going to shorten up that power cable. That's probably going to be my favorite welder. So I really like it. And that's probably going to be my go-to welder if I need to just grab something and go. So, links in the description below for the Bestarc. I'll put a link for the FC90, which is also a great welder. If you have brand preference, those are made by Lincoln. And then I'll put a link to the Harbor Freight welder. I do make commission on the other two. I don't make commission on the Harbor Freight welder, but they're all great, and buy whatever one suits your bill. Now, one more thing I want to point out. On this welder, towards the end, you saw me welding with this nozzle versus the nozzle that came with it, which is this one. This is a gas shielding nozzle. When you're first learning, if you're learning to weld, this may be the better nozzle because it kind of hides the tip. So it's less likely that you'll arc it out. But once you get proficient at welding, I would recommend getting that nozzle. And what that nozzle is, that is a Harbor Freight nozzle for a Vulcan welder, not the titanium that we tested earlier. The Vulcan are the orange ones, the big ones. That nozzle fits that Bestarc welder. However, you do have to use also the tips for the Vulcan welder because the tips that come with this Bestarc are a little bit too big in diameter on the OD of them. And it doesn't fit over them. So you'll have to use those tips as well, which is fine. You're going to have to buy tips anyway. So the Harbor Freight Vulcan welder tips work on it. And actually the Vulcan tips work on all 4 of these welders. But that nozzle itself that you'll need for this Bestarc is for the Vulcan welder. So specifically. So anyway, that's that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it's helpful. Again, I did all this welding on a 50-foot 12-gauge extension cord. So it's the lightest cord that you should be running this thing on. And it did great. Even maxed out when we were doing the repair on the tractor. I had no problems with running that cord. So everything worked out pretty good. So I'm really happy with that. So hopefully that's helpful to you. And we will see you on the next one.